Hello students and welcome to today's lesson. I'm your teacher, Mr. Hampton, and today we're going to be covering topics about the Great Depression and the New Deal. Now, I know a lot of subjects cover this, whether it's economics, history, U.S. history, world history, etc. But today we're going to be looking at Standard 11.6, which is U.S. history. Students analyze the different explanations for the Great Depression and how the New Deal fundamentally changed the role of the federal government. We'll get into what the changes are, what are some of the implications of why the Great Depression took place, and hopefully by the end of this you guys will have a better understanding of how the government changed over time. And let's get started. Maybe I should push the percent button. That would probably work. Okay, so our objective today will be students will be able to identify the causes and effects of the Great Depression. Students will be able to describe New Deal policies by typing what they have learned in their KWL charts. So for many of you, I'm sure you've done KWL charts before. This is where you fill out a chart that states what you know, what you want to know, and what you've learned. So we'll start with the KWL chart. You're going to open a Google Doc, link provided here, and essentially, let's see, you're going to go here, go ahead and pause the video, and go ahead and fill out this information here, as well as this information here, okay? And then later on, after the end of the lesson, we'll fill out the learn part, okay? So go ahead and do that, please. Alright, so welcome back, guys. Let's see. We're going to start with going over some background information about the Great Depression. So, as many of you might know, it was the worst economic time in the United States. And similar to today, we have this concept of something that happened recently, the Great Recession. It wasn't quite as bad as this, but it was definitely on par with the Great Depression. So let's see. The Great Depression lasted from the late 1920s to the late 1930s. This was something that was worldwide. Germany, the UK, France, for example, they were all really impoverished during this time. America had 25% unemployment. Now, during the Great Recession, which happened in 2008, there was 10% unemployment. This was 25%. Also, Germany would have 25% unemployment, but they would get out of it pretty early in the mid-30s because they started going against the Treaty of Versailles, and they built up their military and also did a lot of spent a lot of government money and government subsidies to some people. So this is known as Keynesian economics. I'll get into it a little bit later once we talk about the United States and why that's significant. So for the moment being, I'm going to give you a little background here. If you click on this link right here, it'll take you to a video right here. So go ahead and watch this, and then come back to me in a few minutes. Okay, welcome back, guys. So hopefully you got a little background information of why the Great Depression happened. So I'm going to go over some more information for you. A lot of people will say that it was a result of the stock market crash, and this is a big contributor to the crash. But the thing is, it's not the underlying cause. During this time, even though 25% of employment was pretty rampant, and only 3% of Americans owned stock during this time, so the average American didn't see this come out of their wallet or anything. It wasn't something that really contributed to the downfall of the average American. But definitely, the one result of this is because of the majority of the upper class had stocks. A lot of investment would slow, and if investment's not taking off, then jobs aren't being created. So. Prior to the Great Depression, there was this time in American history called the Roaring Twenties, which was in the 1920s, and pretty much there was a couple new inventions created, such as the vacuum cleaner, the dishwasher, etc. And a lot of Americans were able to start affording this kind of technologies because of the introduction of consumer credit. So nowadays we have things like credit cards, and this concept was actually um, invented in the 1920s, which, you know, it's going to spur a lot of economic growth because people couldn't buy things and pay them back later. That definitely helps investment. So the early 20s to about 29 were really good. The economy was really good. So, um, yeah, but eventually things would slow down. Things would become very difficult for the farmers, and people would start distrusting the banks, which, you know, investment would just come to a crawl. So let's move forward. One moment. Oops, I went a little too far. Okay, so how was this problem addressed? So there's a lot of issues, underlying causes, you know, like I said before. Um, During the early days of the Great Depression, Hubert Hoover was the president of the United States, and he did a lot of things that now economists would disagree with. Uh, for example, he introduced a lot of tariffs, which it kind of disincentivizes people to trade because nobody wants to import things when their economy is very slow. And since the world economy was very, you know, very grim at this point, nobody wanted to trade with one another unless there was tariffs involved, which people don't like tariffs when it comes to trading. And most people nowadays say that um, free trade is kind of the way to go in certain situations. So if you want to get a little forward, actually I'm getting ahead of myself. So President FDR would be elected in 32, and during his first 100 days he would introduce the policies of the New Deal. Now there's two New Deals. There's the first New Deal, which we'll talk about, and there's the last New Deal, which we'll also talk about. But for his first 100 days, he introduced the concepts of the first New Deal. And pretty much wanted to stabilize the economy, make sure jobs came back, make sure agriculture was get some funding, and that people would start trusting the banks once again because we wanted investment to rise to lower these kind of issues. And then we have President FDR himself. Let's see, he was the 32nd President of the United States. He had the longest term, and he actually served 3.5 terms. He was elected for 4 terms. I'll go into why that is in a couple minutes. Pretty much before this, American presidents would serve 2 terms, starting with George Washington. They would serve 2 terms, and then they would get out. They would resign after those 2 terms. It kind of became a tradition, but he would kind of go against this idea, and the reason why is because people didn't really want to focus on an election during the war because it was really it was a total war, so all the economy was based around the war. So people wanted a strong leader, which I believe he was, and yeah, he was part of the Democratic Party. Um, the political parties were pretty different back then. They didn't have the same kind of stances that they do nowadays. So it's kind of interesting to go back and look at the different types of changes that the political parties had during the time. So let's go a little forward. He had vice presidents. Here's his 3 vice presidents. One of them, which was Harry S. Truman, he would become the president after him, his successor, in 1945, and he would go on to end the war with the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. Let's see, he was married to Eleanor Roosevelt. A lot of people say Eleanor Roosevelt had a huge impact on some of the decisions made during this administration. And the reason is because if you look down at towards this right here, where it says he was diagnosed with polio. He was diagnosed with polio in 1921, so he was pretty much paralyzed majority of his presidency. Polio was a lot more common than it is today. I'm not really sure if it exists today because there's a lot of vaccines that have eradicated that disease, and that's very good, obviously. He was cousins with former President Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt served in the early 1900s and did a lot of things that FDR would go on to build upon, such as union support and government spending and conservation of national parks and such. And he would actually pass away in 1945 due to his disease. I'm talking about FDR, of course, and then we're going to look at some of the New Deal policies. I provided a link here, so go ahead and click on that link. And it's probably going to be kind of hard to see, but let's move that there real quick, and I'll just highlight some of these. Now, if you have this on your computer, it'll be easier to see, as I said, but some of them I'll highlight is Glass-Steagall, the Glass-Steagall Act. So during this time, like I said, people didn't have faith in the banks because if the bank goes under, if it fails, people don't get their money back. So during this time, FDR introduced the federal insured bank deposits, pretty much, which if you've ever been to a bank, even nowadays, you'll see that it says member FDIC on the banks, which pretty much means that your money's insured. So back then, if you had $2,500 or under, your money would be insured if the bank was to fail. Now, today I believe it's around $250,000, so if you have that amount of money, you're insured. But if you have, say for example, $260,000 and the bank fails, that $10,000 is not insured. So, and then a lot of other programs, for example, are related to getting people back to work, public works programs, building infrastructure, some union stuff. Let's see, one big thing that also came out of this was the Social Security Act. So many of you probably have heard of Social Security. This was developed in the 30s. Pretty much it helps the elderly, the disabled, the deaf, the blind, pretty much anybody who's unable to work, and it's funded by taxes through working Americans. And it also provides unemployment insurance, which is really good because it kind of keeps people on their feet when they're looking for jobs. And during this time, obviously, a lot of people are out of work. Also, people fund money into, if you work your whole life, pretty much, you fund money into this, and down the line when you retire, you'll actually receive some of this money. So yeah, this is what's known as Keynesian economics. I should have said that in the beginning, but pretty much Keynesian economics is pretty much the government spends money to get the economy, get the conditions in the economy back up to speed. Now, this is something that some economists will agree with and some won't, but it definitely worked during this era. So yeah, let's get back to the lesson. Let's see. Okay, now I want you to pull out your devices because we're going to go to a Google form. I provided the link here. So let's click on that and go ahead and take a couple minutes to fill out this multiple choice Google form quiz. You should be able to answer this by now. If you have any questions, go ahead and email me about this and let me know when you're finished with that. I'll give you a few minutes on that, so go ahead and do that. Okay, so now that you guys are finished with that, go ahead and go back to your KWL chart. This will be the last thing. This will be our closure. And finish where it says learn. Okay, and do that, and that will be our lesson for the day. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, please email me after this. I'll be gladly to answer any questions that you guys have. Thank you.